ecology. That's a general topic. But I see some people here who would like a general topic, but that's not what's going to happen tonight. So I give you a warning, okay? It happens that when the day of the demise of a great saint happens, we celebrate that. Oh, this should be happening too. The bottle, LECHAYYIM. How are we doing? A little bit more. Good. So if you feel that you have been in some way a disciple, a little more, a disciple of that teacher, and now is the day when it's the anniversary of his passing, you go and you meet, you reminisce about what you learned from him. And since we don't consider the passing of a saint to be such a calamity, because it's a birthday in heaven for him. So if you have the attitude that the Yiddish word for that is pagin, that you generously are offering him the opportunity of being there and finding the wonderful surprise that all those things that he had hoped for, prayed for, that have been the target, the goal of his thought. Reb Tirzah Announcements, here's your seat. It is waiting for you. I'm only reciprocating. You're doing that for me so often. Thank you. So, that is an occasion where Hasidim get together, and usually they have schnapps. The best I could do was wine, because the last time we went to shul at Bonne, we brought along the bottle of schnapps that we had with some herring and little boiled potatoes, so that the people would, after the daven, would be able to celebrate how they used to do it in Europe. You know? That sense of having a communal meal in which you share and you pledge each other l'chaim, to life, to life. Remember that song, to life, l'chaim, yeah? So it's that kind of formula. That's why I'm saying on this side is better. Okay. So, the sense that we have is that there's illumination happening for that being on the plane in which he is now inhabiting. And by hooking in to that vibe, if you will, of the teacher, you get to the place where you can also derive something of what's happening for that being. So the teacher who we commemorate today as his day of passing is the Maggid of Mezritch. It's the 19th day of Kislev. He was the one who came after the Baal Shem Tov. He was Baal Shem Tov's successor. He was also the great organizer of Hasidism because of the students whom he attracted and whom he prepared to go out and to do that great shamanic holy Rebbe work that they had to do, and the teaching and the guiding of people in prayer. Two people once came to him, brothers, and he sent them away very soon as accomplished teachers. So the other people said to him, how come we are sitting here much longer and these two, Reb Pinchas and Reb Shmelzit, were sent out quick? So he said, the reason is, they came to me like a store full of candles. I only had to light one of them.
Yeah.
Okay? In other words, they had the preparation, and not only they, others came with great preparation, spiritual disciplines, and they all had begun with the spiritual disciplines that were, how would I say, in vogue isn't the right word for it, but I haven't got a closer word, you know, where the general practice was that if you wanted to do something spiritual, you had to somehow torture your body, you had to somehow practice austerities, fast, and so on and so forth. Break open the ice and dip in the cold water. All these kinds of things that people had done. And the sense was that they're not only doing it for themselves in order to get rid of that feeling of how the body is obscuring the soul. And if you can make the body less intimidating, in fact, if you intimidate the body, then it will not obscure the soul, and then you'll be able to be closer to God. And then comes the Baal Shem Tov, and he doesn't dig that kind of stuff. And to him, it being in the body and with the body to serve in such a way. He was also a healer. He knew about herbs, and he was a shaman. So with all these things, besides the heavy Talmudic education and mystical education that he had, you can imagine what kind of a person he was. And so his disciple was the Maggid of Mezritch, and concerning the issue of asceticism, he said, be careful, keep your body whole. A small hole in the body will cause a big hole in the soul. That was a real change from the way in which they had it before in the Zohar even, where they said, Tukfa de gufa chulsha de nishmata. The strength of the body is the weakness of the soul, you know? If you want to have a strong soul, you have to weaken the body. So he had that attitude, and that shifted at this point. If I were to speak of his contribution, you know, everybody gives over what comes in the tradition before. So he's a transmitter of tradition. So I can't say that, for instance, that you should rest on Shabbos is an invention of the Maggid of Mezritch, okay? It's in the tradition, it comes a long way for us. But if I were to say what is his thing that he had come up with, and I find something remarkable, he's asking the question, what is KADMUT HASEICHEL? What is that which is just a step before our awareness? The awareness of how awareness becomes awareness, okay? Now, you can understand how this is a very important question if you are going to do inner work. Because then you realize that the awareness that you have as a product is called the seichel, is a product of the maskil, of the one that causes that intellect to happen. You know, and this whole controversy now going on about evolution and intelligent design and so on and so forth, is such a silly argument when you go to the place in which you see the order in the universe and what inheres in it. And the problem for most people is that they see the designer outside of the universe, as if he is sitting there and working on clay. But if you understand that the designer is in the universe, he's designing it from cells and from atoms up, as it were. And then you see how as we move from simplicity to greater complexity, and how integrating that is, and you get a sense of a kind of greater totality. So if you realize that, then the question comes up for someone, how come I'm conscious? What makes me conscious? And that's what's called KADMUT HASEICHEL. And he is so interested in penetrating that and to teach from there. He also teaches some remarkable things about where Torah is. There is always the question, what difference does it make to God if you're going to eat chametz on Pesach? You know, you're going to eat leaven on Pesach when you shouldn't be eating leaven on Pesach, so fine. So what difference does it make to God? Ma ichpat le lekutche b'richu im shochet min hatzavar or min haverid. You know, these are the kind of questions that you ask. Why is it a difference? It makes a difference. Where does it make a difference? And then the question, how does the infinite connect with the finite? And how does it happen that God gives us commandments that we would then ask? See, some of the commandments are practical. Some of the commandments we don't quite understand where they come from. But one thing is that they have taken a certain kind of shape, and you wonder, why does the infinite have anything to do with that shape? So there is the other side of the coin, is the question, why does God need people? Why does God need people? If God is the omni, all the perfections there, then what does he need people for? And so you get a teaching that comes from the heart and not from the head. Because it says God is lonely. You know, there's a sense of God is in solitary confinement, as it were. There's no place outside of God where he could go, you know. So everything happens within God. So then the question is, why people? And the answer to this question is, why do you want to be loved? Why do you want to be loved? Isn't it that everybody wants to be loved? We want to have that sense that the universe cares for us, that God loves us, that we are loved, that we're here not as an oops. Okay? So then we get to the place, apparently God wants us to love God too. And so that element of being created as a human being, having a sense of the vastness of it all, the wonder of it all, that one exists and so on. So there comes a sense of great appreciation that we want to offer up. And from there comes everything that becomes religious. Like this wonderful story about the shepherd, the Baal Shem Tov, and some people say it was someone else, but it doesn't matter, the story is a good story. He was told that he should find out how to really serve God. So on whom should he check out? He should check out this and this shepherd. So he comes, and they hide, and they see how the shepherd takes care of the sheep, and then he says, God, I love you so much. For your sake, I'll jump across the brook 7 times. I still love you some more. Let me see. And he reaches in his pocket, he has a few kopecks, he says, I give you those. You know, that sense of Ma Ashiv Ladonai Kol Tagmulohi Olai. How can I give back to God all that God has bestowed unto me? That sense of wanting to serve that way. So then the Maggid of Mezritch says like this. It is written, when are we called children? When we do the will of God. When are we called mere servants, slaves? When we don't do the will of God. So the Maggid says, what kind of servants are those who don't do the will of their master? No, that's not what it means. Instead of do the will, he says, create a will. Children create a will in their parent. But a servant doesn't create a will, he has to fulfill the will. So he says, imagine there's this child who wants to ride horsey on Papa. And the child says, Daddy, I want to do Hoparaita. And he gets down on the floor, and the kid is sitting on him and says, "Giddy up," and is having such a ball. And a colleague of the father, who is also a rabbi, comes in and sees this dignified guy on the floor and says, "What's that all about?" He said, "My kid wanted it." So he says to him in this scathing way, "Male wo das Kind will, so what if the kid wanted it?" From this censorious way, he said, "No, you don't understand. The kid so wanted it that I wanted it also." Okay. And here comes the Maggid and says, if you want to know the ground from which all commandments come, is that ground. Would it be okay if we shukel the lulav? Would it be okay if we eat matzah? Would it be okay if we keep Shabbos? Oh yes. I'll do it with you. You see? So here's where the Maggid comes in with that. And so he wanted his people to experience things. One of his students, Reb Zusha, and I may have told you that story, he would hear the master begin by saying, so many passages in the Torah begin, and the Lord spoke to Moses saying, So the teacher says, and the Lord spoke to Moses. The Lord spoke! Oi! So he started Reb Zusha couldn't contain it. Just the miracle that God spoke. And I want to tell you something. Most of us haven't yet gotten excited over that, But if because somehow we think the infinite is sort of infiniting all the time, is not interested in us and what we're doing and so on and so forth. But if somebody were to be able to say, hey, God is going to talk to you tomorrow. Oh yeah, I feel in my kishkis. So what do I have to do? Should I clean myself? Should I go to the mikveh? What should I do? Should I stay up all night? You get the idea? How do I prepare for that momentous thing? But the excitement of the reality that there is a communication between the infinite and human beings, that excitement Reb Zusha had. And he had it because his teacher, the Maggid of Mezritch, had done a lot of book learning. And he came to the Baal Shem Tov and wanted to test out, should he be a disciple of him because he's got this reputation, but I gotta see if it really is my vibe, if I want to do that or not. So he comes to the Maggid of Mezritch, and at one point he says to him, have you studied such and such a passage in the Zohar? And he says, yes. He says, well, tell it to me, what does it say? So he gives him a very good interpretation of that, as the reading of the Zohar would give, and the Baal Shem Tov shakes with his head. And he says, oh, you mean I should give you the other interpretation? And he starts quoting Reb Chaim Vital, who quotes Rabbi Yitzchak Luria about this passage in the Baal Shem Tov. It still goes like this. So he says, have you got another interpretation of that? And he says, stand up. So he stood up, and the Baal Shem Tov stood up, and he started to recite the passage. And the angelic presences that were embedded in that passage manifested there. So you get a sense that it isn't mere words that's happening, there is something much, much deeper. So he awakens that in the Maggid of Mezritch, and the Maggid of Mezritch awakens that in his disciples. So that when they get to a text, and they want to understand what the text means, don't do it only with your head. Enter into that with an imaginative way. So there's much to tell about that, but I can't leave it at that. I could go on the Maggid the whole night, but it's also the day when his disciple, Reb Shneur Zalman, we have this picture over here, had been incarcerated because the people who were the opponents of Hasidism wanted him out of the way. At first they had done a excommunication of him and of other Hasidim, but that didn't do enough. And so they found a way in which they would be able to find something on him that the government would dig. What was it? There were some Hasidim, also disciples of the Maggid of Mezritch, who had traveled on to the Holy Land. Now, if you can imagine, come to the Holy Land, and what do you want to do in the Holy Land? Holy things. So how are you going to make a living? So, as a jokester in Israel says, Hamotzi lechem mechutz la'aretz. That means you get your bread from out of the country. In other words, people would send donations, and that was the thing about the pushkis that we had before, lighting candles, and we would put money inside and at prayer, and that was always for those people who were in the Holy Land. Now the Holy Land was at that time under the Ottoman Empire. And Russia and the Ottoman Empire were not so friendly. Could you imagine if someone would have sent some money to Soviet Russia during the time when the wall was up, that the Iron Curtain was up? It would have been so easy for someone like a McCarthy to come and say, he is sending money to Russia to overthrow the government. Well, basically that's what they said about Reb Shneur Zalman. Well, once you put that on, the Patriot Act comes in, and right away you go and you have to fight against that because the state will be upset and so on and so forth. How did it get to that place that they would be so angry with Reb Shneur Zalman? So I got to go back to the Maggid first, okay? Reb Shneur Zalman grew up in the, what I would say, in America I would say in Missouri. In Lithuania. Lithuania is, you gotta show me, prove it to me, okay? I'm a Litvak. And so everything there in, among Lithuanian Jews in Vilna was dealing with rationality of the Talmud, making sure that you understood and you learned it in great detail, that you could dissect it into small ideas and then put it together again in a way that was sort of sharp like pepper, which people call pilpul, in which you could show what a wonderful acrobat of thought you were, okay? Now that was the outer part. The inner part was that this was sincere study, but because you wanted to understand very clearly, you needed to do that analysis at that great depth. So Reb Shneur Zalman, who makes a deal with God very young, that he will be in God's service. When he was 3 years old, his father had taken him to the Baal Shem Tov, who, you heard of the custom upshevenish, you know, where the first haircut that a boy chickle gets. So they took him to the Baal Shem Tov for upshevenish. And Reb Shneur Zalman, the child, was saying at that point, "Who is that?" And his father says, "Azede," a grandfather. And he considered himself to be a grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, even against his physical grandson who threatened him once. He says, "I'm a grandson of the Baal Shem Tov." He says, "So am I. You are after the body, I'm after the spirit." You know, he wasn't ashamed of that. But remember where he came from, okay? Now, while Reb Shneur Zalman is making his way from Yoshdeh, where he lived, to Mezritch, something else is happening. There are other students there, and those students are learning about angelic beings. And there are those that are called Ophanim, the wheels, like Ezekiel saw the wheel way in the middle of the air. And there are some that are called the holy beasts, if you will, the holy animals. And there are those that are called the seraphim, and there are all kinds of angels. And as they were hearing these things, they were asking, how could they really feel it? How could they realize what that is, what that angel is? So they're having this conversation whereupon Reb Shneur Zalman comes in with his pekala from the outside, and here are these people very much a little older than he, but you know, people who they look good, they look like Torah people. What are they doing? And one guy starts turning cartwheels. and turning cartwheels. And then he comes to himself and says, that's what the ofanim are. The wheels are. Another one, you know, there are four big beasts seen there. One is a lion, the other one is a bull, the other one is an eagle, the other one looks like a human being. And as he describes those four, he becomes those four. He roars like a lion, and it's like he isn't contained in his skin, it's way beyond that. And then when he comes down, he says, that's what the Chayot HaKodesh are like. And another one comes and says, and starts getting so silent, so quiet inside, that it's as if he becomes transparent, all the way burned through, totally transparent. So the others get it too. So you can imagine, here are people talking about those entities, everything that's there, and they're going into their experiential thing. I can imagine it would have freaked out some people. Reb Shneur Zalman comes in, and he's not used to these kinds of things. So he isn't impressed either, you know? So he's leaning against the door and is wondering what this is all about. Is for this he made the journey. When he hears the steps of the Maggid, who had crutches, because one leg wasn't operating well, so they could hear him boom, boom, you know, with the crutches, making his way. And the Maggid comes in, and he said, Anochi asiti eretz, ve'adam alea barati. I have created earth, I have made earth, and the human upon it have I created. The word barati spells out 613. I created the human being because I want the human being to do the 613. Angels, I have enough. That's what Reb Shneur Zalman decided, that this is my teacher. I'll sing one of his Niggunim, the Maggid's Niggunim. Yai dai dai da ai dai dai da ai dai dai da didim ai dai dai da dam ai dai dai da ai dai da dai dai dam ai dai 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 da dam dum So, being connected already with the Niggun and the Rebbe and all those beings and the angels and so on and so forth, would you check out what is it that you need a blessing for at this time? So that we'll say LECHAYYIM and hope they'll answer us from that other region back again and say LECHAYYIM to us. And be intercessors for the things that you need a blessing for. So I'm going to go my place and you go your place, and then we'll say LECHAYYIM.
Amen.
LECHAYYIM, LECHAYYIM, LECHAYYIM. LECHAYYIM, may there be fulfilled for you what your heart desires, so that you could live a more abundant life in which you can give God pleasure. Say Amen.
Amen. Was that the Maggids?
Huh?
The Niggun that you just
Yeah, that's the Maggid.
It's a little question.
Yeah.
It's something I've always wanted
Go
to
on.
get clarified. Yeah, and then there's bing bong, and then there's die.
Yeah.
All those different consonants, and they all have different qualities and vibrations.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you talk about that in the Niggun class. I never heard you discuss it.
The cough drop was in the middle, so I couldn't give you a good, clear answer. The question is the scat. Because if you're singing, it's not only the vocal stuff, and if you're singing with words, then you have the words to help you punctuate rhythm. I mean, that's what rap is about at this point, you know? The words punctuate a rhythm. Now, if you want to get to the place of singing and you don't have words, so the music would go ha ha ha, ha ha ha, you know, like ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. So I'm making one note, but I'm interrupting it with breath. So what would be a better way to do it? Ya bum, ma bum, ma va, ya, aha, and all these ways, okay? So the question now is, which is the authentic? And there was a musicologist by the name of Netanel Miles-Yépez who wrote out bim bum and taradam and all that kind of stuff so that people would have the words for that. And recently I got some Chabad Niggunim that had a guy in Israel mimic a Russian doing the Russian yavabas, but they came out in the wrong rhythm, the wrong way. He didn't know how to do that. You know what I'm saying? Didn't have the geschmack of that. My sense is that if you ask yourself, what does the mouth want to do in order to support the melody, the prayer of the melody, okay? So then you get to a place where sometimes you go, ya na na na, oi na na na, oi na na na, oi na na na. You see, you begin from the oi place, and na na, right? Mamara, mamara, ya mama. You see, that adds to rhythm, and so you got to let the rhythm come the way it goes. It doesn't. I can't make
So
a
there are
rule
mystical
for that.
connotations for each consonant. Someone told me that there was the
No.
babas are different than the mamas and the lavas.
Gesundheit, you know. I see that when people sing Reb Shlomo's Niggunim today, every generation has a way of making it go a little bit different because some people can't stand that contemplative slow rhythm either, and when you accompany it with a guitar, and guitar is strumming, and strumming is also rhythm, so you never get that legato that was in the other thing. But that was a far journey away from the LECHAYYIM at this point. So I go back. So Reb Shneur Zalman stays with the Maggid of Mezritch, and he's the youngest of the people there at that time. Later on, Rabbi Yisrael of Koshenes came, he still was younger. But it was such a magnet, you know. It's almost like, it's a secret and it's not a secret. The people who are looking for the teacher, really seriously looking for the teacher and praying to find one, get steered to someone. And that's what happened, and not everybody knew about it. Other people came to the Maggid of Mezritch simply for his blessing and for help for their life problems, but the ones who became his disciples, they were interested in learning from him, to the point that someone once asked, "Did your Rebbe do miracles?" He says, "Miracles? We're all over the floor, but we didn't bother to pick him up because the teaching was more important." You get the idea. So that's where they were with the Maggid of Mezritch. One day the Maggid comes around and he finds his disciples sleeping. Where do they sleep? No dormitory. A bench in the Beis Midrash. Maybe you had something, a bundle to put under your head, but you would sleep on the bench. So they're all sleeping and he is tiptoeing in to look at his disciples and has a candle in his arm and looks at their faces as they're sleeping. And he comes to Reb Shneur Zalman and he says, "Oy, oy, 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 oy. Such a vast God in such a small body." In other words, he knew his realization was there quite early. The question is, how do you deal with that? How do you impart it to other people? So remember, he came from Lithuania, so there's only one way in which you can make this go to the people who are nurtured on Talmud and on reason. You have to make it reasonable for them and base it on Talmud. And the truth is that some people, when they talk about the you got to help me out. Perennial philosophy, right? They say that kind of teaching has been there around a long time ago, and it just continued through and through. And there is something to that there is a stream of people like prophets, like Moses, that stream of people who have a stronger connection. I often like to cite the situation of what's called the axial age. It was a time when you had Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Zarathustra, Mahavira, the Buddha, Lao Tzu, and Confucius, all around the same time. So you get a sense that there are some people who get it, and there are some times when it comes down much stronger. Mm-hmm. And not everybody has the vessels to contain it, but those beings have the vessels to contain it. So it's not that it begins with Reb Shneur Zalman, It was there, but it always gets covered up by the exoteric overwhelming the esoteric. Let me spell that one out. The outer part, take a look right now when we look at Islam. Some of us have had contact with some wonderful Sufi teachers. And with them, what can I tell you? The only thing that you can feel is, I respect their God. You know? I don't mean their God, but I respect their Godding, how they're Godding, you know. And I can't say this about the people who are doing that physical jihad and are killing people, that I could respect their God. I can't say that. So what has happened is that the outer trappings of Islam have discarded the inner life of that, and that is the overwhelming part of the outer over the inner. And that happens in every tradition sooner or later, you know, because it's like a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox. You know, stone soup, you know, duck soup. Duck soup is the story. So it's not, it gets, if you will, it gets diminished all the time. So every once in a while it needs a fresh injection of life. So here's Reb Shneur Zalman, and he has a problem. How is he going to mediate the great teachings, those great notions that he has received about consciousness and prior to consciousness, and that awareness of how the four worlds are, and the 10 Sefirot, and a recognition that this is not only happening on the outside, somewhere there's a heaven in which there are 10 Sefirot, but I'm embedded in that, I dwell in that. And how is he going to explain that to people who don't have a notion about that? And that's the task that his master gave him. And so when you look at the Sefirot, so you see the first three are called Chochmah Bina Da'at. They deal with the intellect. The next three are called Chesed, Gvur, Tiferet, and they deal with the heart, with feelings. The next three are called Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. They deal with function and energy. And finally there is Malchut. And when you have these levels, there are some people, how would I say, there are some cerebrotonic people, you know, big head, big Adam's apple, toothpick body, you know, and you can't get them out of a book to come to dinner. Okay. Such a person is going to want to find the secret of the universe in concepts. There is another person who is just in his body and in his muscles, and you would ask this somatotonic person, what is it all about? And he would say, shoulder to the wheel, nose to the grindstone. We've got to do something, don't just sit around here. And then you ask him, so how do we serve? He would say, you do this and you do that. And he gives you a whole list of what to do. And then says, if you do this right and you don't veer to the right and you don't veer to the left, you'll be fine. There's another one who says, "Oi, those doers, those thinkers, I want to tell you something." I'm going to quote now Joe Miller from San Francisco. "You can get more stinking from thinking than from drinking, but the feel is for real." There are some people who have that sense. If I would ask, you know, like someone like St. Francis, you know, and we have Reb Zusha, you know, the issue is, does he feel it? Does he feel it? And so, but Reb Shneur Zalman has to talk to the people who are the brain people. So the question is, how does he bring them into the issue of knowing more about God and the kind of service that comes from the esoteric, not from the exoteric. No, not only from the exoteric, because he also spent time to redefining the code of Jewish law for his time. So it's not that he left this out. People often think Maimonides was a great philosopher, and they don't realize that he also was very much the legal authority for Jewish law. By the way, the son, Ibram bin Maimon, his yahrzeit is tomorrow. Yeah. He was a Jewish Sufi, an amazing person. So, before I got sidetracked with the Sufi, where was I?
Who Reb Shneur Zalman was talking to.
Okay, thank you.
And you're also the three different types of feeling and body and
Right.
doing.
So he's talking to the head people, okay? Right. How do you get to the head people in a way that they would open up some space inside of them? Okay? Because as long as they're manipulating, remember I before describing like acrobats with concepts, you know, how do you get them to open up a little deeper? So he begins by asking some questions about the nature of a human being. And one of the books that he wrote, and that's the most prominent book of his, and therefore the book is called the Tanya, and when you refer to him, you say the Baal HaTanya, the author of the Tanya. That's how people speak of Reb Shneur Zalman, because this was his magnum opus. He calls it the book of the person in between. And he goes the following way. He says, when you look at the hierarchy of people, so there's a tzaddik, very righteous person, Rosh, a very wicked person, and somewhere in between there's the Beinoni, the in-between person. In fact, there are not only a tzaddik who is a total tzaddik, but there's a tzaddik with some flaws in it. There is a Beinoni, and then there is a person a little bit wicked, but then there is a terribly wicked one. Okay? So he has 5 grades there of people. Now, where did this notion come from? Because the book of Job is a wonderful embarrassment to the Torah. Because why should an innocent person suffer? Why should God have a bet involving a human being who would have to scrape his sores with a sharp because it hurts and sit on a dunghill? You know, when the Torah says, if you behave right and you do everything right, you're going to get rewarded and you'll be good. And this is the very opposite of that situation. So the rabbis come up with these 5 categories, and they say like this. If you are a total tzaddik, that's a tzaddik v'tovlo. He has a good in this world because he's so good that he has his reward in the world to come, and he can also, it spills over to this world. Tzaddik v'tovlo. Then there is another person who's a tzaddik. He's a righteous person, but we see he's in trouble, he's of tzores, he's poor, he's sick. Tzaddik v'ralo. The tzaddik and his bad friend. Why do you call him a tzaddik? Because his reward for the world to come is going to be still there, complete. But for what he failed to do right, he gets it in this world. That's why he's tzaddik, but it's bad for him. Then comes the Beinoni, the one in between. Then there are some, you look at some people, wicked people, look how they can get away with it all and be rich and ein chatzivot lamotam ubari ulam. They look so healthy, so strong, so successful. You know, what right do they have to do that? The answer is they're not altogether wicked.
Yeah.
So for the good that they're doing, they get rewarded in this world, but they won't get a reward in the world to come. And then there's a totally wicked person who has it bad in this world and in the next world. Okay? That's up to here from the Talmud. Reb Shneur Zalman hears this in a whole different way. And he says, look, all of us come equipped with what the rabbis have called the inclination for evil and the inclination for good. And these two are always battling with each other, depending on who wins. If the inclination for good wins all the time, you're dealing with a tzaddik v'tovo. If the evil inclination wins all the time, you deal with a Rosh Hashanah, a wicked one who has a bed. But what happens in the internal dialogue? Because even when you decide not to do something that would go against your morals, there's a battle going on. Potiphar's wife is asking Joseph to be with her, and he refused. That's how you chant in the Torah, okay? It is a shalshelet, it's a chain. But what does it show? It shows that everybody has internal conflict about things. Should I do it? Should I not do it? Should I do it? Should I not do it? And this person, we can't call him a tzaddik v'tov lo, that he is a perfect tzaddik, because a perfect tzaddik wouldn't even have a bad thought. What has happened? He has so totally converted every part of him into the service of God that he is a perfect tzaddik. On the other hand, the person who is a perfectly wicked person doesn't even have anymore a pang of conscience, you know? What we would call a total sociopath, right? But then, how do you help most of us who are always caught in this battle? Over what do we have choice? Over what don't we have choice? What are the powers we can bring to bear in order to live the good life rather than the other way? What is it that we can do in order to stay in touch with God rather than not? Now notice, by this time we are not talking anymore about two people holding on to a talus and fighting to whom it belongs. You're dealing with something much different. But since it touches everybody who has ever looked and studied Torah, and he knows about the inclination for good and the inclination for evil, and he knows what it means to struggle against his own inclination for evil, this person begins to feel that this is important. I gotta hear what this guy has to say. You know, I don't know where you were when you discovered for the first time that inner battle and became aware of it and asked yourself, how do I steer this thing? And so that's a very important time of waking up to yourself. And so Rosh Hashanah comes, even if you're the most intellectual person, but when they blow the shofar, something happens to you, you know. And the prayers that you say that speak about the judgment that's going on, that happens to you. So he was able to enter the minds of those people by teaching them the inner psychology and the way in which to do it. He told them also, you know, when you study Torah, that is so special, so wonderful, because anyone who reads in the Torah, God sits and reads opposite to him. You know, that sense of learning Torah directly from God. You know, most of the time we just talk about it, but there was one night in my life that was so wonderful. I had the key to the little shul that was downstairs of the place where we lived, and it was at night, and I was finished with my work, and I had some time, and I went downstairs and stood in front of the Yom Kodesh and said, "Dear God, I want to learn a shtickle Gemara. Would you please teach me?" You know? And then I sat down at the table with the Talmud book, and I'm sure I didn't have the skills to understand what I understood that night, and the wonderful feeling that was. Now, can you imagine if your life is a Torah life, and so many of those people didn't do anything in the outer world. They were supported, they were Torah students, they were on this kind of, some of them when they would get married, would be promised by their father-in-law 10 years of this kind of scholarship time to be able to sit and study Torah. So they were doing this, it's called Toratam Umnatan. Their Torah is their business, and so they were so involved in that. And so here, Reb Shneur Zalman comes and shows them how to learn in a much deeper way. How is that? And so he says, the mind wraps itself around an idea. But if the idea is a divine idea, the divine idea wraps itself around the mind at the same time. Okay? Now, you can imagine the second chapter of the Tanya deals with how does the soul and God connect and what that union is, and so on. So he is teaching this to people, and I forgot to tell you, his father-in-law was very unhappy that he went to Mezritch and not to Vilna. So he wanted to get rid of him, or him change his mind and give up those Hasidim, because they had a very bad rap. The bad rap they had gotten was because of Shabbatai Tzvi, who was a failed Messiah before that time, and they thought that they were just going in the same direction and that this would lead them away from Judaism. And so that was the accusation, stay away from those Hasidim. So his father-in-law, in the best way in which he could coerce him, would even take away the candle so he couldn't sit and study at night, even the stuff that the father-in-law wanted him to study. So he studied by moonlight and what he knew by heart. It was hard for him. Reb Levi Yitzchak had the same situation, when he came home after being with the Maggid, his father-in-law said to his wife, do you want to divorce him? Why? Because he's with those, The sense was that if you're with the Hasidim, you got the cooties. That's how people dealt with that. So what happened was that more and more of those wonderful young people who were the great Iluyim, the geniuses of Torah study, the way in which you would describe some of them, you would say that if you take a folio of the Talmud and you bang a nail through a particular place, they would tell you that on page 69 such and such a word is in that place. How they read it verbatim, how they knew all that. And all of a sudden these guys are away. They're not doing that anymore. Funny story. My Babi Alei Shalom, Babi Chashale, she heard that her anikel, that's me, the oldest anikel, is becoming a chassid. Oh, she says, nice, chsidish, negidish, balabatish, in her language, let me translate it. Chassidish, sort of prosperous, a good householder. That's what she thought I was becoming. Okay? So then she heard what kind of a chassid she has. So I said, Chabad. Oh, you weiß nicht Terrible. What was so terrible? She said, in Zholtve, in her town, we had a Chabadnik, and he would drag away the good boys all the time, and then they would spend the whole day in the Besmedrish dimmen. Dimmen is like, they're not doing the books, they're just sitting there, they're meditating. And I had fallen into that particular cult. My Bobby wasn't happy about that. Because the other Hasidim were very nice, they davened with the minyan, they sang nice things, and they were there to eat kugel. And those Chabad people, would come home Shabbos afternoon at 3 o'clock after they had spent the morning davening ba'arichos to really take their time at davening, you know? So you can imagine that this created a stir. How do you neutralize this guy? So one person tried to write a book against what he has written, but turns out to be that he more agreed than disagreed with him. That was Reb Chaim Volozhiner, who was a disciple of the Gaon of Vilna, who stood out as the other pole, the anti-Hasidic pole. Reb Shneur Zalman and his friend Reb Mendel of Vitebsk decided that it's time for some dialogue. And so they went to Vilna to try and talk to the Vilna Gaon and explain to him what their position is and to hear if he has any, what would be his opposition to it. But he didn't want to meet with him. They say that when they had come to the house, he ran away, going out of the window rather than through the door where they were standing. And the reason for that they gave was that his mother said to him, B'gzera kibut ein, you must not meet with those people. So the saying was among the Hasidim that had they met, they would have brought Mashiach's coming closer. And you can imagine this kind of thing because dialogue is something of this sort. Anyway, in the beginning, Reb Shneur Zalman would be teaching more like the Maggid of Mezritch by saying short things. When he was in his prayer, he sometimes would leave the words of the Siddur and he would call out and say, God, I don't want the world to come, I don't want your paradise, I only want you, you know. He was that one in this way, that strong in this way. In other words, almost saying that all the good spiritual treasures you want to give me are nothing, I want you. At the same time, when he was younger, the Maggid of Mezritch had a son by the name of Reb Avraham. And Reb Avraham was known as the Malach, the angel. He was an amazing, amazing soul and mind. But he had a very thin, if you will, envelope, his body. So the Maggid told his son, you teach him the mystical stuff, and he will teach you the esoteric Talmud stuff. So they had a deal that they would have an hour. He would teach an hour, the other one would teach. But Reb Shneur Zalman confessed that he would always take the clock and turn it so that he would get more than an hour for the hour that he gave him. He wasn't sorry for that. So one night they're involved in doing one of the practices. And in that practice they have gone as far as one can go and still be in the body. You know, there's, when people describe different levels of samadhi, there's one that's just almost near vikalpa samadhi. It's almost not come back anymore. And they got to that place and Reb Shneur Zalman ran into the kitchen and fetched some beer and a bagel and forced it down the throat of Reb Avraham. So he saved his life because otherwise he wouldn't have come back. So the Maggid says to Reb Shneur Zalman the next day, I thank you for saving the life of my son. But one question do I have. He says, what's the question? Where in that sublime universe of Atzilut could you find a bagel and beer? So, how could you be
a bagel in that zone?
in the world of Atzilut? You found a bagel and beer. How could you do that? And Reb Shneur Zalman was this way, and I want to tell you that he was in this way like a kite. You want to fly a kite, You have to have a string and you have to hold him down. If the kite isn't grounded, it's going to fall down. It needs to have the string to hold it down. And Reb Shneur Zalman had that thing, to the point that one day he is praying in his room on the next floor. His son is praying in his room, the floor below. The son's son is in the crib and is falling out of the crib and is crying. And Rabbi Dov Baer, who is the son of Reb Shneur Zalman, is so far gone he can't hear the child's cry. Reb Shneur Zalman, in the middle of prayer, comes down, picks up the child, and holds him, and then later chides his son about why he isn't staying grounded, even at that point. So I want you to understand, he was a fantastic threat to those other people who either wanted to cut them off from earth or from heaven. And so, since he sent the money to the Turks, they had a good excuse, and they went and informed against him, and he was arrested. YUD TES KISLEV is the day when the Rebbe was released from prison. I want to say that's when the boss got sprung. Okay. But the questions of what happened for him there and on the way, that's so remarkable. When they came to arrest him, he was wearing the tefillin on his head. And they saw him with the tefillin and they backed off. They couldn't get to him to arrest him when he had the tefillin on. Later on, his disciples asked him, what happened? He says, it is written in the Talmud that the people of the nations will see that the name of God has been called upon you. And then the Talmud says, that's the tefillin on the head, tefillin sheb berosh. So they said, but we also wore tefillin, so how come they didn't get scared, from our wearing the tefillin, but they got it from you. So Reb Shneur Zalman said, because it says tefillin sheb berosh, the tefillin that are in the head. You only had the tefillin on the head. I also had the tefillin in the head. You get the idea of that kind of realization that he was about. Okay. So they come and take him, and Shabbos is coming while they're making away with what they call the Black Mariah, the wagon that was for prisoners. And they're making their way, and he's saying, please stop for Shabbos. And they said, no, you're not going to tell us what to do. You're a prisoner. You're indicted for treason. And he said, we have to stop. They didn't stop. And in those days, when you didn't have ball bearings and stuff like that, axles would break. And the axle broke, and then they had to really wait until it was repaired. And only after Shabbos did they go. So there is a poem by Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, that some people recite on Friday night, where it says, of oxen betelen u'shvisin. So Reb Shneur Zalman made the pun, is saying, even the axes, the axe will break and make Shabbos. So finally they have him in jail. He wouldn't eat anything that they would give him in jail, so after a few days hunger strike, they managed to get him food from somebody who can vouch that this is a really kosher food, and sent along a note. And that gave Reb Shneur Zalman the opportunity later on to also send a note back in the dishes, so that they would know where he was. So there he is in jail, in solitary. And every once in a while, the Maggid of Mezritch and the Baal Shem appeared to him right there. And the strange thing is, that the teaching that he got while he was there from them really was a crown of the teaching that he had gotten from them before. So there is a person who interrogates him. He is described as some kind of a general. So he asks him all the kinds of questions. Who are you? Where do you come from? And tries to trip him up. And what's this money that's going to the Turks? Finally, he gives him all the answers, and then the man says to him, "You know what? You're a rabbi, and maybe you can explain something to me. You see, in the Bible it says that after Adam and Eve ate from the fruit of the tree of life, of the tree of knowledge, what happened was that God called out and said to him, 'Where are you?' Now, isn't God supposed to know where he is? What kind of a thing is that? Where are you? Ayeka." So Reb Shneur Zalman says, "Do you believe that the Bible speaks not only to one generation but has words for us today?" "Yes, I believe so," he said. "That's the call that comes forth every day to every soul. Where are you? Where are you?" And that touched that man so much that he came back with a report to Alexander, the Tsar, and said, "I can't believe that this guy is the way they say, that he is seditious, that he wants to overthrow the government," stuff like that. I don't believe that. So the Tsar said, "I'd like to meet him if he is as the kind of person that you, but I can't come in now dressed as who I am." So they agreed that they would dress him like a prisoner who is on death row, or who is on death row for sedition, and they're going to put him into the same cell as Reb Shneur Zalman, and he will play that he is that kind of a prisoner and say bad things about the government and see what Reb Shneur Zalman is going to say in return. So he comes in, and Reb Shneur Zalman gets up and says, "Welcome, Your Majesty," and says, "Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech olam, asher halak michvodo lebasar v'dam." Blessings to God who gave of His glory to flesh and blood, the blessing you make when you see the sovereign of the country. So he says, how did you know? He said, "You see, there's a divine attribute called Malchut, His Majesty. It is given to the sovereign of the country to be in touch with that, because he couldn't be the sovereign without the Malchut being. So when you came in and Malchut came in with you, so the emperor says, hey, this guy is not one to want to overthrow the government and the king." In the end, he was released. And he was later on arrested a second time. And on the third night of Hanukkah, he was released again. The question, it didn't quell the opposition. It took quite a while for that opposition. And it still has some leftovers, some residues in Israel. Later on, there was the same situation within Hasidism, that some people would say they don't like Chabad, other people said they don't like Braslav. If you become a Braslaver, you're out, and so on and so forth. And all this is because these people were taking their way to God more seriously. Now, I told you this is not going to be a lecture like all the other lectures. It's not a general issue because we are celebrating the Rebbe and his thing. I'd like to play for you a melody. But before I do, I want to say, let the melody carry you. See, don't try and judge the melody, but swim with the melody. It's an orchestral version of his. when you go with a Niggun like this, you get a sense that what people try to call by name of dveikut, which has translated like cleaving to God, holding to God, being cozy with God. The sense of, it goes way bigger than how we usually imagine it to be. You know? When it gets to the place where you feel you may not dissolve as a drop in the ocean, but the sort of when you touch the ocean, you get a shtickle feel of the ocean while you're still a drop, you know? It's that kind of sense that a Niggun takes you to. You have been very good and patient people, and I want to tell you a couple of mices, good stories. When in later generations, when they would celebrate this day of YUD TES KISLEV, it was for this community, for the Chabad community, it was the feast of the year. And another way in which they talked about it was, they call it the Rosh Hashanah for Hassidus. It's like the Rosh Hashanah, the new year for Hasidism. And the reason why they took it this way was because once Reb Shneur Zalman was released from prison, he had to go and meet some other people and a thing of fence mending, hoping that this would lead to a kind of more peaceful attitude. He wrote a letter to his disciples and said, don't celebrate my release like a victory and shame the others. This is a time for reconciliation. And this letter gets also read. It's the beginning of his letters at the end of the book of the Tanya. So he had to go and visit various people, and they first of all wanted to see how good is he in Talmud, because that's the measure. You know, they used to say, never mind if somebody tells you I've got this big spiritual thing, how do you assess that? There's no measuring way of that. But if he says, I've learned, then we can go and ask him to see how much he remembers, how much he knows, how he integrates it, how he understands it, and so on. There was one Hasidic master, his name was Reb Tirzah of Lublin. He also was one of those geniuses who had this photographic memory and also knew what to do with it on the inside. So he had to come and get smicha, his approbation to be a rabbi, to get ordained. And how you did that was, you came to one of the great rabbis of those days, you would talk with him in Torah, he would test you out and see that you are worthy of getting named rabbi. He would write out the document for you and give you smicha. So he comes to the rabbi of Lemberg, and Reb Yosef Shaul Natanson was his name, and Reb Tzaddik tells him, I've come that you should hear me out and give me smicha if you feel. He says, do you know the Talmud? He says, half. Half. Which half? Whichever half you're going to ask me. You aren't supposed to say, yeah, I know the whole Talmud. So, you know, but that was his way of saying, whichever half you want. So the issue then was that Reb Shneur Zalman is being asked all kinds of questions by this rabbi, and finally he's satisfied that on the level of Talmud and the codes, I mean, he's good. But then he asks him, who will be the Messiah? Will it be a chassid or will it be a misnagid? So Reb Shneur Zalman says he'll be a misnagid, an opponent of Hasidism. He says, why would you say that he would be a misnagid? He says, because if he were a chassid, you wouldn't believe in him, and then he couldn't redeem you. You know, he has to come as a MITNAGDIM so that you should be able to say, to accept him. Reb Shneur Zalman was very much on the side of the Tsar against Napoleon. There is a book that Professor Buber wrote called For the Sake of Heaven. It's a remarkable book. It describes the time and the disciples of the seer of Lublin and the Dharma combat that was going on at that time between the two fractions, the ones that said that Napoleon should win. Because, look, if you were a Jew and you looked at Napoleon and he represented something fresh, something good, and he even wanted to have a Jewish court, a Sanhedrin, could you imagine? And he would give us citizenship, and so on and so forth. And that seemed to be very promising. Whereas under the Tsar, they still would not get any of the basic privileges that citizens would get. They would still be hounded. And so you can imagine that there were some rabbis who were saying, we are for Napoleon. But Reb Shneur Zalman was for the Tsar. And his argument was like this. In some way, I think he foresaw the Holocaust, because he said, if Napoleon wins, then wagons will go up to their axles in Jewish blood. There will be such a slaughter. You know, nobody would have thought that Germany, as intellectual and intelligent and scientific and so on and so forth, would be capable of doing a Holocaust. And the French and so on and so forth, he wouldn't think about it. But right now in Paris, it's not a happy time to be a Jew. And so what you get from these situations was that Reb Shneur Zalman wanted, he says, with the Tsar we know what we are, and the Tsar doesn't offer us enlightenment, he allows us to do our Jewish stuff, and that continuity of doing our Torah life is more important. And then, so there were the other ones who were wanting, so how do you make sure which side is going to win? So they agreed the following way. The Michel Z'lotchover, he was on the side of Napoleon. Reb Shneur Zalman was on the side of the Tsar. So each one sent like a second to the court of the other. And the agreement was that the one who was going to blow shofar first, on Rosh Hashanah earlier, that his side will win. Well, at the place where Reb Michel was and Mendel Rimanov, they were going gangbusters. As soon as the day came, usually on Rosh Hashanah you daven slow, you know, you say, Hodu Lado Shem Vishmo. You daven very slow, and with all the intonations of that. And here they were going quick, rushing to the daven, so they should get to the blowing of the shofar. Then Reb Shneur Zalman, the guy was with Reb Shneur Zalman, comes back, and they knew that once he gets into davening, he isn't going to rush. You know, the words of davening are going to take him places. So they were sure that they were going to win. So the guy comes back and he tells, so nu, how was it in Yoshne? He says, Reb Shneur Zalman got up in the morning, called the people together, did the shofar service, and then he started to daven. So he said, oi, what a Litva can do. You know? What a Litva can do. He outfoxed him in this way, because he didn't want to give up the slow of the davening. But according to the same halachic rule, the mitzvah of shofar could be done right the first thing in the morning. So that's how he did it. He had a disciple who was a merchant, spoke many languages, and Reb Shneur Zalman wanted him to spy on Napoleon. So he sent Reb Moshe into Napoleon's camp. All the tents in that camp were made to look the same, so that that he would be safer by not being outstanding. So he found out which was his tent, and he walks into the tent and makes himself like, "Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry." And meanwhile, he was taking a quick look, because there was a map hanging there with all the points in the map inside and so on and so forth. He grabbed it, he saw it. Napoleon says, comes over to him and says, "Have you come here to spy?" He says, "Spy? What am I to spy about?" And he makes himself like that. Napoleon figures, he can be an actor, but let me see how his heart is beating. He put his hand on his heart, and it's a calm heart. So he says, "Go." He let him go. He came back and described what he had seen on that map and so on and so forth, and so the story goes. So they asked him what happened when Napoleon touched him. He says, "I just remembered what the Rebbe had said, Moach shalit al halev." It is the mind controls the heart. So you see here somebody who not only knew how to do the meditative stuff so that the mind would get into the heart and create that reality map that he was seeing in his soul and put it out there for him. So strong was that control. They had to flee Napoleon, and so since he was breaking through to the northern parts of Russia, because remember, Petersburg was a place that you want to conquer where the Tsar lived and so on and so forth, as in north. So when people fled Napoleon, they went south. So Reb Shneur Zalman and his family, he did not want to leave anything there that Napoleon could take hold of. The sense was that if Napoleon would get something that had his vibes on, that wouldn't do him any good. So they took everything that he had touched and so on and so forth with him. He sent back one chassid and he says, "I'd like you to bring me the melody with which he marches into Yadi." That's the city where he was. So the chassid came back with what is known as Napoleon's March, and every Yom Kippur, when Yom Kippur service is over, Chabad people sing Napoleon's March, which is a way, because Reb Shneur Zalman says, yes, he is playing this march now, he will play a different melody when he makes his retreat from Russia. So they kept that triumphal melody and they're singing it when Yom Kippur is over. Here's how it goes. So, as you can see, it doesn't end in a good ending, so that you should go on, do it again. So they sing it sometimes several times to show that having completed the fast of Yom Kippur and so on and so forth, we can count that we have had victory over evil at that point and over the bad karma. I hope that you will get a good victory here too, again in the merit of Reb Shneur Zalman, and that we will have a good healthy winter. And Yehi Ratzon that avian flu should not mutate into people, and that I do hope that the anger that people have about finding out that they were without law being spied upon, that this will have good fruits also. And I say, I drink to that. L'chayyim!
Yasher Koach.
מי שבערך חיימותינו שריך גרך ולא יברך. ואת אבותינו אברהם, יצחק ויעקב הוא יברך וירפא את ראש המדינה אריאל שרון. בעבור שעסק בהבאת שלום. וזכר זה הקדוש ברוך הוא יתמחיה וירפא רפואה שלמה. וישלח לו ברכה והצלחה כדי שיתחזק ויתאמץ לעמוד ביחד עם המפלגה שיצר להביא עוד שלום בין בני ישראל ובני ישמעאל הפלסטינאים, ונאמר אמן.
Thank you, Reb Zalman.
Have a good night.
Thank you. I have a few little announcements, if you don't mind. Reb Zalman is just set the next schedule, and the next Yesod newsletter will be out, but it won't be before January. So I wanted to just say a few things about some important dates. Reb Zalman and Eve will both be teaching together, Rebbe and Rebbitzin. Is it okay if I call her Rebbitzin? She won't take offense.
No, she doesn't mind
She likes
Rebbitzin. There's a whole question on the web whether you should call Rabbanit or Rabbah. Right?
Okay, so,
Yeah.
but Eve is the Rebbitzin, so they're going to be speaking before, not Velhenzer, before Purim at the end of February, right before Pesach, before doing deep teachings, sort of kitchen teachings, as well as the highest realms of teachings about Passover, as well as the first annual Rocky Mountain Jewish Meditation Retreat is going to be held March 19th to March 26th with Reb Zalman, Reb Miles, and national meditation leaders, Jewish meditation leaders are coming into Shambhala Mountain Center. So that's during, I think that's the week of spring break. And closer to that, there's going to be if you've ever wondered about the mystical alphabet, and first I want to say, I'm sitting next to the amazing artist who did these beautiful, please go up and look at the mystical mural here and take a little taste of Yerushalayim and the Samadhi land here that she's painted. This is Sandy Pond. Sandy is someone who really knows about the mysticism of the alphabet. So mysticism of the alphabet is going to be a year-long training, really going into every letter, 2 Sunday afternoons a month. It's very doable. It's taught by me, and hopefully Sandy will help, and another amazing Hebrew calligrapher named Ayal Hausfeld, who is here, a beautiful artist. It's really studying every letter, Aleph by Bet, by how to make it, how to construct it, but also creating a relationship with each letter to understand what it's an archetype of, what is it the mystical meaning of each letter, and forming a relationship with it so that you understand how to read it, how to see it, what it really means when it shows up in a word. It's a powerful language that we have, Hebrew. So that begins January 15th is the introductory talk, and then it begins truly on January 22nd. And if you're interested at all or have questions, you can call the Yesod line. Judy, thank you for setting up. Is there anything else I'm forgetting to say? Yeah, please.
I feel moved to
bracha you back.
Okay.
Our Rebbe.
And
I'm ready to
to
take.
thank Hashem for you in our world, and to make the clean prayer that next year we sit together and you give us in your most excellent health on all levels.
Amen.
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 Well, now I got to say something else. There is a what was his name now? The one who wrote Herzog.
Sol Bello.
Saul Bellow has a scene in which he describes a guy walking down the steps, and he remembers something he should have said before. And these things are called Trepwertlach, on the step words. So I got something that's a Trepwertlach for tonight. People who, there was this controversy about Happy Holidays versus Merry Christmas and so on and so forth. And I would like you to think of how many people who have seen Christianity from the inside consider Christmas as being the time when the Savior is reborn in them, in them. That's what the calendar stands for. So if you can wish somebody that and say, Gesundheit, let it happen for you. It would really be wonderful, if every one of us would be able to achieve what we are affirming. It would be good. So let them have a good Merry Christmas. B'moichel, the white of it. Doesn't have to be a white Christmas. It can be a sunshiny one too. But let them have a Merry Christmas.